You don't know what ghetto style means right now. I guess I'm just going to break it down for you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, episode 88 of Three Brothers Talking, getting ever closer to 100. We're just, boy, you can almost feel it. You can almost smell it. If it was wearing a high visibility shirt, you could see it.
Back to our previous.
That's a callback, man. That's a callback. You know, that means that today we are not talking about high visibility again. No word yet on the high visibility shirts. We'll get back to you on that.
I have not been hit by a car yet. So there you go.
Jeremy's still, they're still working for him.
Yep.
That's
Still
good
working.
to know.
Faith can see me coming a mile away.
The other side of the house. She always knows where Jeremy's at.
She always knows where Jeremy is.
Yes. Anyway, this is episode 88. My name is David.
I'm Andrew.
I am Jeremy.
And I'm gonna put the plugs on the front end of this episode, even though they're normally on the back end. So the front end, the plugs are share this podcast with somebody who might like it. The only way this podcast gets around is by people rating it, reviewing it, and mainly just texting it, sending it to people who might enjoy it. So if your friends have taste like you, they probably do because they're your friends. Send this to them so that they can listen to it and hopefully enjoy it. And we can, whatever it is that we do with this podcast, we can do that for them as well. That's the goal. So
both my friends already listen, so
2 for 2.
I don't know who to share.
2 for 2.
But 100% of my friends have good taste.
Yeah.
But they both like it. So
you have a saturated
and Jared
market.
already listens too, so that's 3 for 3. That's 300%.
300% success rate with my friends. That's something to be proud of, I think.
There you go. I'm an influencer. We are influencers.
Well, I'll tell you what, guys. I just had some lights flicker in my studio here.
So did I actually in my studio.
We've got a bit of a storm coming in, so we got to brave it, push through it, and hope that the internet doesn't die.
We got storms.
That could make this really boring.
We've got them over here. Andrew's on the other side of town.
My power's flickered twice.
I was like, I thought it was all clear over here, but okay.
Well, that means it's not clear over here yet, but we'll see. We are recording remotely, and that means that very soon we got to work out a plan to do video, and we got to work out a plan to do video in the same location. But Andrew's
we've only got 12 left.
Yeah, we gotta actually have to figure it out.
Podcast conference.
We've got to do.
That will do it.
We got to go video spectacular for the 100.
That's right. Yeah, Andrew.
We can sell tickets probably.
Exactly. I'm planning on it. Tickets and high visibility tickets.
There'll be high vis tickets forever in the season. You don't lose them that way.
That's just I don't know why that's so funny to me, but it is.
So buying you both high vis shirts for your birthday.
I would wear it. I'm being honest.
Yeah,
I would.
that's cool.
All right. Okay.
But we are remote tonight, at least partly because Andrew's got some travel planned for this weekend. As
sure
of
you tell
recording
everyone about the pod when you're there.
Hey, we've got.
We won't throw the dates out, but I'm pretty sure this is going to release well after he's back. So
yeah, probably.
So we should have
we've got
listeners then.
We've got the 5-year anniversary with the spouse. So at the time of this recording, it's this weekend. So yeah, getting away a little bit without the kids. So it'll be a welcome little break.
Where are you guys headed?
Am I allowed? Should I tell everybody?
I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's
think
up
we
to you.
should keep it
You
a
don't have
mystery.
to. It can be a secret.
I think we're safe.
Are you staying in the contiguous in the United States? His stalkers might go back and try to find the
I think we're good. I'm not gonna worry about stalkers. We're heading to Nashville for a long weekend. So
David's releasing this tonight, so that way everyone will follow you.
yeah.
Well, two things. One is it's not like their house is going to be abandoned while they're gone. There's no security. There's no security threat there. The house is being watched over by people. Well, the people living there while you're gone. And then And then also you'll be well
Well,
back.
and this,
so,
I was like, this is gonna release after the fact, so
well after.
Yeah. So if you try after, Andrew will be there, so it'll be awkward.
If you're hearing this and you do try to rob his house, it'll be troublesome.
I thought you were in Nashville.
and
I thought this episode was live.
There'll be people staying with our children at the house. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Wait a
there's
minute,
really
this is
not
a live recording.
The bad news is that there is no good time to rob Andrew's house.
Nope.
Never a good time to rob Andrew's house.
I've always got things.
Let's just put that plug in there right now.
I've always got things under wraps, guys. Thinking ahead.
Always thinking ahead. Always prepared. That's the Andrew Eppelt motto. Anyway, it's my episode tline, guys. My episode, which means
David, what are we talking about on your episode?
We are going to talk about we're going to talk about compassion, sympathy, and empathy. Because if anyone knows me, I'm an incredibly empathetic person.
Yeah.
But
You say pathetic.
the reason that we're talking about this is actually because it has caused and seems to sort of perpetually cause a bit of a storm on Twitter. Like every now and then, this becomes the hot topic again. And it becomes a thing that people bat around on Twitter and Christians go back and forth about. And people get a little too angry about it, if you were to ask me. There's a little too much anger about this topic when it gets brought up. And it all got started years and years and years ago, honestly. It was kind of a long time ago. It was all the way back in 2019 that a guy named Joe Rigney, who's, I believe, still the president of Bethlehem College and Seminary, which was started by John Piper. And he wrote a pair of articles years and years ago about compassion and empathy. And he was basically writing these articles to show the bad versions of both of those things. Is kind of when I read the articles, we'll post them so that you can read them. They're not horribly long. I think that everybody can read them, and they would take a little bit of work, but especially both of them together. But I think most people can read them. But when I read them, I get the feeling that he's trying to point out two ways that both sympathy and compassion can get corrupted, and they will be not fruitful. They won't be good. Even though they're supposed to be virtues, they won't be. Now, the reason that this got really spicy is because he entitled the second article, The Enticing Sin of Empathy. Right? So he purposefully named it that way, I would assume. Maybe somebody else picked out that title. If you know anything about writing for a website or a newspaper, I know for myself, from my own experience, not everything I wrote appeared on a website with the title that I sent to the website. Sometimes they retitle it because they know what'll get clicked on and all that. So now he has sort of stood by this over the years. I think that he stood by defining it this way. But anyway, that's why people get really up in arms about it, is because he's calling it a sin, empathy specifically. So that's why people get angry about it, I think. I think maybe some people get angry about it because he's hitting a little close to home for them too. But as is normally our fashion, as we talk about something that is controversial for other people, I think that we're going to be able to kind of hit some of the highlights of these articles. I do want to read at least a few pretty significant quotes from these articles, just so that we have a good idea of them. And just like we did with, I don't know, the Mike Stone, Russell Moore thing or the Mark Driscoll stuff, hopefully we can wade into this, talk about what's good and what's bad, be honest and be actually fair, and not become a screaming, immature voice in a crowd of immature voices. So, all that said, Jeremy, do you have any thoughts before we dig into this a little bit about this?
I think you and we've discussed this many times. I have many thoughts about it. I don't think anything in the article is unfairly written. say that up front.
Yeah.
I think the title gets people jumping because they just rightfully or wrongfully, which he gets into a little bit in the article, is are we taking it too far in many cases, and are we then neglecting something different?
Mm-hmm.
We should be doing is basically what he kind of touches on. There's a time and a place for all these things in different weights and measures.
Yeah,
and how you go about it.
One thing that I think is important here is like this is a good practice for when you're engaging with someone, especially a fellow Christian. In some ways, you have to be cognizant of how they're defining their argument, right? And so what I've heard is a lot of people have podcasts or blogs in response to this, and they say like, well, he's just stupid and evil because sin, like empathy is not sin. So there. And it's
they just take it black and white to a degree, and that's not what his stance
exactly
is.
you have to be a careful enough thinker that you stop and say, okay, but how is he like he's defining empathy a certain way for the purposes of his article. Like he's trying to communicate an idea, and so we have to do him the favor. He's a Christian. Do him the favor. Do him the favor of like saying, okay, I could just go off of the title, or I could just go off of what I think you should be saying.
Yeah.
But I'm going to actually try to crawl into your argument a little bit and understand what you're saying.
Like play out the situation that he's laying out here.
Exactly.
Yeah. And one quick caveat, I think, too, I would love to see how many people who've read the article have actually read, because it's written in the prose as far as Screwtape Letters goes.
Yeah.
Which is a very tricky way to actually do it well. And granted, it's not a badly written article. He does it pretty well with it. I've heard different people write it in different ways. Or as far as just in that way of writing things. And that's something you have to look into. And I'm curious how many people actually thought from him that way and actually have read the book from which he got the idea to write it in this manner.
Yeah.
Because I think that also changes to a degree how you go about reading the article too. And his stance on how he wants to go about it. As far as the trickiness goes, because that's basically the entire part of Screwtape Letters is how we're using a good thing to then thwart the enemy, which they call the enemy, which is God and his plans.
Yeah.
Like, how, like, hey, remind them it's lunchtime, so they skip reading this now. Or, like, do these things, which aren't necessarily, not everything they do is a sinful thing in and of itself, but it's a distraction tactic from the greater argument.
Yeah, when you read this, you have to understand it is written from the perspective, like the Screwtape Letters, of the enemy. And so, and the other thing that I'll say before we dig into this is that there is absolutely, I can speak, I think with 100% certainty for every member of the podcast, absolutely none of us are like Joe Rigney, what's the term now, stans. Like none of us are Joe Rigney apologists. Yeah. I think I've seen or heard maybe one podcast my whole life that he's spoken on. And it wasn't even on the subject. Like it wasn't. No. I've read these articles basically by Joe Rigney. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
And so I feel
think I've read a few more things than you.
There's no like loyalty there. But there's not even a loyalty like all of us have appreciated John Piper, different parts of his ministry through the years. But there's no by any means like desiring God till we die type of vibe on this.
We're not getting desiring God tattooed.
We're not holding the banner for any of those.
No. Yeah, there's
and that's
absolutely
to your point,
none of that.
I think that's a good point, is saying that we as Christians can read these articles, take what we can, and to a degree actually have a critique if it deserves it, but also think, are we as society too much on the... Is the world influencing us and how we're reacting to these things and flying off the handle, or are we actually just taking it for what it is and saying, are we actually evaluating this off the Bible or how it makes us feel?
Yeah.
To your point about empathy and about feelings and how he...
So I would say if you're going to actually critique, especially a fellow Christian, do it with everybody, but especially a fellow Christian, like just be fair, be honest. I listened to a few... The reason that we're doing this is because it's stuck in my head long enough, because I heard a few people respond to these things. And I just felt like they were maybe so mad or upset or something that they were like, it felt like they were purposefully like not getting what he was trying to say. And that is, again, I don't think these articles are perfect. I don't think they're scripture. I don't think that they're without fault. I don't think that Joe Rigney was inspired by God when he wrote them. So there's faults to faults to them, but when I was listening to some other people do it, I was like, are you trying to like, are you like, he didn't say that. He didn't say that.
Yeah, I was like, you're not truly in.
You're putting words in his
I was
mouth.
like, you're not truly in the mindset that he was when he was writing. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and granted, I've also heard him speak. There's a Man Rampant episode on this, and he discusses it, which I've heard after I read these articles, because these came out before that.
Okay.
And that also, him talking through it, obviously, because it's written differently. So you're having someone talking about a topic versus a narrative about a topic comes off completely different.
Yeah.
So I guess that also goes in the same point of let's actually think through and read through things. Throw the baby out with the bathwater. This makes me feel upset, and it's different than something else.
Yeah, and real quick, I was a little, but we need to dig into this. But I was a little unfair there. I don't think that everybody who has beef with this is just upset and with hurt feelings.
Yeah.
That was overstated on my part. I think that's probably the case for some people. I think maybe some people just don't. I just felt like in a lot of the responses I listened to or watched or read, for whatever reason, I was just like struck by the fact it just seemed like that people were, because they're smart people, so I didn't see how they could be missing what he was trying to say and loading it with a bunch of other stuff.
That wasn't explicitly.
Yeah, I feel like when I read these, he says in his introduction to the second article, it says, "This is the second of 2 letters on the demonic distortion of the virtue of compassion." So that's his goal, is to show how compassion is a virtue, but it gets distorted. And so that's, when I read them, it's like, this isn't a full treatment. This is like pointing out they're blog posts, guys. Like, anyway, I'm going to dig into them. The first one, I also think a lot of people that maybe don't like his post or something about the sin of empathy, I think they probably didn't read his first article about compassion.
They probably jumped straight in the second one. The second one got more traction than the first one.
Yeah, because it's way more enticing. Yeah, no pun intended. Yeah. But yeah, I heard a lot of people say like, well, he seems to be this advocate of just like this really harsh truth telling all the time, like for somebody who's suffering, right? Like no compassion, basically. And it's just really funny because his first article is about compassion. It's addressing that very thing. So his first article, I think, is really good. Some of the quick quotes from this, and we can just react to it. He's talking about, again, written from the master demon to his understudy, trying to teach him, here's how you get your patient, is what they're called. That would be us, the humans. Here's how to get your patient to be bad at compassion. Here's how to get in the way of that. It says, the simplest way to do this is to link compassion to another virtue such as truth-telling, and then have the second virtue swallow it up. The enemy wants the humans to have bowels of mercy. He wants them to practically ooze with sympathy and pity, which, though guided by reason, are nonetheless animated by the deep feeling and affection. And then it goes on to say, instead, you must teach him to regard speaking the truth in love as a redundancy, as though any true thing he said is loving, whether or not it is fitted to the occasion, and whether or not he is the proper messenger for it. So that whole section is like throwing down the gauntlet of like somebody's suffering, and the response is not necessarily to just go in with double-barreled truth without love. Right? Mm-hmm. That sometimes when people are suffering, you do actually have to speak the truth in love, right? You don't just speak the truth, period. You speak the truth in love and in care.
Yeah.
And so this is the going on here. He says, I once had a patient who lived by the mantra, quote, the most loving thing we can do for people is to tell them the truth, unquote, and was thereby constantly immunizing others against the enemy's warnings and promises. This part I thought was great. His demeanor was so off-putting that words which might have been a great comfort to others in his family and his church became a byword and a mockery. So you can see how he is being very clear here, like that Joe, the author of this article, doesn't seem to believe that it's okay to be a compassionless truth teller. Right? He's saying that's a bad thing. To teach someone to tell the truth, so much so that those things that are true become a curse to the sufferer, right? Like that they should be a promise, they should be an encouragement, but instead, because of the way they're presented, because of the way they're taught, they actually do damage. They don't bind up, right? They break down. This goes into this next statement. This tactic is especially useful for statements like God works all things together for good. So Joe even points out how there's this tendency that Christians have to like just throw that phrase around as though it gets rid of suffering, as though it just like ends pain. He goes into how he says to train your patient to start using the silver lining method, right? Where they just, somebody's suffering and you say, at least this didn't happen. At least that didn't happen. You've lost your job, but at least you have your health. So his whole, there's all these things that to me ring to be very compassionate, very careful, and pretty good instruction that I would give to somebody if somebody was asking me, like, as a pastor, what do you do with somebody who's suffering? I think that this article actually gives you a pretty good strategy of well, do not do this, this, or this. Don't do any of these things. And so in the end, it says basically you want to teach this guy to speak the truth without, let me start that again. You want to teach this guy, the human, you want to teach him to speak the truth while ignoring patience, long-suffering, wisdom, and fitness for the occasion. That's basically the whole point of the first article, is that compassion can go awry when we, that truth-telling can go awry when it doesn't have compassion, when we lack that compassion. I don't know. We can jump into episode or the article 2, and then I keep on saying episode. Good grief. Article 2, talking about the enticing sin of empathy. So I want us to hold everything in our minds from the first one, right? So as we go into this one, I think it sort of helps us see that he's not, in fact, an unbalanced, crazy person.
Yeah.
At least the way, because that first article exists. Yeah. Right.
That's what I was trying. That's what I was trying to get to. Is that if you have to take it in spite of reading the second article as well. Just the fact that the enticing sin of empathy can go a bit too far. So I think, okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. Even at the beginning, the first paragraph, it talks about how this is so surprising to the master that he's like, my student didn't recognize that empathy was in fact a sin that we came up with. Now, that is provocative. That is, I would say, I don't know that I would ever use that phrase exactly, that empathy in itself is a sin. Define the way that he's defining it in this article. It's not what you pursue.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that it's sin, but it's certainly not what you pursue in life as a virtue. The virtue is compassion. The virtue is sympathy.
I think that would have been, and he does say that in the article. I think the way that it's said there in that sentence is provocative.
Mm-hmm.
It gets to what he's trying to actually play at, which is feelings are now trumping everything, and without us jumping into their feelings, to jump forward slightly in there, you aren't really loving them. Like you're not being compassionate to the person and loving this person unless you're doing these things, which is a twisting of the virtue.
Yes. Yeah, and he's fair. I mean, he's fair to point out that like empathy being really a word and a virtue is kind of a recent human invention. That's true that it's been taught to us that empathy is an improvement upon compassion or sympathy. He defines it this way. So this is really important to understand how he's defining this. Compassion only suffers with another person. Empathy suffers in them. I'm quoting the article here. It's a total immersion into the pain, sorrow, and suffering of the afflicted. Under our influence, we've taught the humans to think only a heartless and unfeeling beast could oppose such a total immersion, such a generous act of love. Our recent success in this conceptual migration has given us ample opportunity for mayhem. So that's how he's defining it, right? Suffering with another person is compassion. Empathy is suffering in another person. Jeremy, you brought that up just a second ago. Could you take it like a step farther about what he means by that?
Well, I think in the way we've read all these articles lately, you basically have the idea that if I am sympathetic versus empathetic, which both are virtues and both have their time and place, there's a time that I can and cannot relate to you as empathizing with you and not, because I might not have experienced. And I don't have to experience everything to help you and everything. That's kind of where the twist, I think, happens. We've basically said, well, with our feelings, we then let all feelings trump all truth. But the issue is, when I look at Jesus, yes, some of the translations of Hebrews have used the words empathize. He can empathize with us in our weakness, and that is true. He did take on flesh to empathize with us as our high priest in our weakness. He also sympathized, saying that I am now reaching down because I am better than you, and I've come to fulfill the task at hand. Meaning that he has a foot on the shore that we don't have. And to a degree, when you get in discipleship style things, and what most of the issue I had with the articles and podcasts that reacted to this, they basically just completely just threw out any idea that you couldn't stand on the outside looking in and say, well, are you sure you're just not 100%? Like, there's a degree where we've all said, well, I think your feelings are off base. We've all had people who've had emotional reactions that are too far. And yes, they've had things that have made that way in their past. But that doesn't mean that we should not still try to help them and change them or work with them to change and love them across that process like Christ would. To a degree, we're all being sanctified by the Holy Spirit. And that outside force then helps us to help others. And that was where one of my big things had with all this compassion, empathy movement. It's twisting the fact that I have nothing to gain by being a neutral party here.
Basically,
we would say in many other areas is everyone should have a neutral party because they actually are a good sounding board.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think is near the beginning of this article is that our modern sensibilities make us, when we're suffering, we ask two things at the same time from people around us that are impossible for them to give us at the same exact time. So on the one hand, we don't want to be made to feel that we really need help from people. But on the other hand, we want people to notice how deep our pain and sorrow is. So we want people to notice. We want people to feel for us. We want people to feel with us. But we also don't want them to help us because we feel like that is undignifying to us, right? So we want sympathy from people, we want empathy from people, but we also don't want them to go to the illusion that you brought up, Jeremy, which I think Joe uses probably in that Man Rampant episode. Is that where he talks about having a foot on the bank? If somebody's drowning,
discussed in more detail.
Yeah, if somebody's drowning, the idea of the way that, and again, this is how he's defining it. Okay, so you can disagree with whether or not this is the proper way to define empathy. Right. But to treat his argument fairly, you have to say, okay, this is what you mean by it. So what he means by empathy is somebody's like in the river, you jump into it with them. And he's saying that's not good for you or the person because you will both be carried away. Instead, keep a foot on the bank. Step one foot in so that you're compassionate, but also keep a foot on the bank, aka like keep one foot out of feelings and onto truth so that you have traction to pull somebody out. But in our modern sensibilities, if we're the one in the river, we hate being pulled out of our feelings. We don't like it.
Yeah.
It feels like it's necessarily invalidating to us. And it could be, again, somebody, going back to that first article, somebody could be a jerk and they could actually be overstepping or whatever. But that doesn't mean that just because someone presents truth to us when we're feeling something, that they are necessarily messing up, right? They could be doing the perfectly right thing by bringing truth to bear on our feelings. But that's the way that he defines it in here. I thought was good. Empathy, he said. Compassion seeks the sufferer's good and subordinates itself to God's standard of truth. So it seeks the sufferer's good while maintaining an allegiance to truth. And then in the article it says our alternative, empathy, shifts the focus from a sufferer's good to the sufferer's feelings. Basically making the feelings the measure of right, wrong, and whether or not somebody's being loved is how they feel about something. So he gets into the 2 feet type of thing in here a little bit as well. But I'm curious, thinking about this, what do you guys think just about how this speaks to like our modern age? Do you feel like it's a valid critique of where we are? Do you feel like it's invalid? Do you have any beef with these these articles, either one of them?
I have no beefs. I think the reactions to them that I've heard have not actually been a fair assessment of the articles.
I feel like they missed.
I feel like they missed the point.
Maybe.
I feel like they missed the point. I feel like if you could have gotten, I would just say if you watched the other stuff I've listened and read from him, I would be more on the side of. I could understand some of the feeling arguments coming out from like the Man Rampant discussion that I've watched, because he explains it more versus this. I read this, I'm like, yeah, this is an article. I don't think it really sways me one way or the other if I just read through it. I think it's a blog post and it's meant to read through, make me think a little bit, maybe, but that's about it. It's how I treat blog posts.
No, I was like, I agree. I think it's like reading through both of them. It's a matter of people looking at the title and then reacting and not giving it, like, not actually getting into his frame of mind. That really where the problem becomes, where they might have a reaction and come out. But like when you actually read through the article, you get to the point where, okay, like you might, like David said, like you might disagree with how he's framing up his definitions, but you can at least appreciate like what he's building as far as his argument, and you can agree. Like I can agree with his point that he gets to, based on the framing that he set up.
Yeah, and I have trouble. If people's complaint with this is that it denies like the reality that God made us with feelings, and that we will go through some traumatic events, and that those traumatic events need to be handled very sensitively. So I think a lot of people's pushback to this is probably a fear that this type of article, right, can be a tool that people may use
to not be sensitive, and really to not be compassionate.
Yes. So I would say
you can take someone's feelings.
Yes, somebody could use this article to do that. I don't think they would. I don't believe that they would be honoring what was written. I don't think
they'd be honoring what he actually says in the article.
Certainly in his first article.
Resources from him.
But I could see how that could happen. I don't. He didn't write all that. he didn't write all like the qualifications into this second article, right? There's not a lot of qualifications because it's all blog posts.
Yeah.
But I get why people would have that, and that's a valid point of like it's not just about somebody's suffering and you just stand on the bank and say, I know how to get out of your situation. I'm better than you. That is a non-Christian.
None of us would.
That's a non-Christian response. It does require an actual compassionate stepping in to the suffering. Like it does require the foot in the river and on the bank. But one thing that I think about as I read through it is how it is for my good that like you guys or other people, the pastors that I pastor with, it is for my good that they refuse to, let's use the term over empathize, or they become swayed.
Yeah.
The way that Joe ends up putting it is shifting from the true. So Joe's affirming this in the article, by the way. He says, you want to move your man from the bland but true belief that feelings are important to the false but powerful impression that feelings are all that's important. So Joe is in the article affirming that feelings are important, right? He's saying that is important, and then he's saying the problem is when we start to think that feelings are all that matters, and that they trump truth. When at the very least they just walk alongside truth, right? Like they never trump it, and so I think one thing that I was struck by when I'm reading it is like it is for my good that the people around me refuse to overly empathize. Like, I don't want the people around me to empathize to the degree that they are in the river next to me.
Yeah.
I don't want that because I want one of us to be able to get out of the river.
And we've all heard, I don't know, I know us three have heard the adages. We all want friends who will say hard things to us.
Yeah.
I have a friend who says hard things. All they're going to do is empathize.
Especially in an idolatrous way.
From the standpoint of empathizing, meaning, only your feelings
in a sinful way,
like,
or in a extreme way.
Yeah.
Right, and they're not gonna say, "Man up, brush it off, get back on the horse,"
or even just say, "This is actually hard," and this is hard. Here's the truth to live out.
Yeah, and this all gets back to the framing of the definition of empathy versus compassion in the beginning.
Yeah,
like whereas if you're saying, you don't want someone to over empathize with you, then you have to get in the mindset that he's framing up with this article in the first place. And that's what we're getting at here, where we don't necessarily have a problem with that. And I don't myself, but that's where people don't often give it a fair chance. Based on just reading maybe a couple lines or the title.
Yeah. And I do think, it's the danger here is on both sides. Yeah. I think that's probably why he wrote 2 articles. I don't know. Yeah. Like the danger is on both sides.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It's on you as a person, as a Christian, to be cognizant about which ditch you're likely to fall into with other people. And if we're honest, sometimes different people in our lives, we will be... some people in our lives will be more empathetic to. Some people will be more truth-telling.
Yeah.
There's some people that it's easier for you to tell the truth to, and there's some people that's easier for you to just feel with them. And to be a better servant to both of them, we have to see, all right, how do I stay out of either ditch? How do I have one hand holding on to this person that I love, and also one hand holding on to the truth, so that I can bring that compassionately to them, caringly to them. If that's all that Joe is trying to communicate, I think that's an incredibly biblical thing to say.
Yeah.
I think that is what he's mainly trying to communicate, at least in these articles.
Yeah.
I haven't spent tons of time beyond these articles, so I can't speak if there's some interview or something somewhere where he just says something totally wacko. I'm not aware of it. So if that's the case, let us know, I guess, and we will amend. I'll happily amend this conversation.
Oh yeah. It was like the end. The frame of our conversation here is like whether you err on one side or the other. Like we are saying to stay rooted in the truth, regardless. And like that, So that's the way that, we're framing up this conversation, and that's where we ultimately want to stay grounded towards.
Yeah. But it should never be easy. I think one warning sign is that it should never be that easy for you to tell the truth to someone who's suffering.
Mm-hmm.
It should never be that easy. If it's just you don't even have to think about it, you kind of enjoy it. That's probably not a good sign. Like, if you've been with people who are really suffering, even just saying the words that you know to be true and they know to be true, it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Even if even if you know it's totally true, and because you care about that person so much, and you have a heart for their suffering, it will make the truth hard to say.
Yeah.
You still need to say it. Don't need to stay tied to it. But if your heart is breaking for somebody while you're saying it, then it won't just fly off your tongue. It won't just be a sport that you're playing. It'll be actual, like, you'll actually feel the weight of it.
Your skin in the game.
So yeah, I mean, if you're gonna push back on what he said here, I do it fairly, but we do need to make sure that we are putting, Jeremy, I love how you said that. Like, we need to make sure that our skin is actually in the game when we go to people who are suffering. We need to actually enter into it.
Remember, we're actually representing Jesus. Yeah. Like, that's kind of where it all is, and this whole thing is what we do day to day. How would he come to us? That's our goal, and how we're living everyone around. Love your neighbor as yourself. Is that how we're actually going about these things? And if that's our goal, and we may not do it perfectly, we won't. But we're growing in godliness.
Yeah,
that's the daily call. And how we interact in difficult situations and even the mundane, normal, monotonous situations of life.
Isn't this just...
It all takes the same
Isn't
argument.
this just like the greatest verse to summarize it? Is we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses.
Yeah.
But one who in every respect has been tempted and yet without sin. So in the word sympathy, by the way, sympathy literally means to feel with somebody. I heard I forget what podcast it was, but they, in their podcast, like, they had somebody on, they said, like, empathy just means to feel with somebody. And I'm like, actually, that's not what that word means. To feel with somebody is literally the word sympathy. That's what the prefix SYM means, is with. So it means feel with. But that's what Christ did for us. Yet he did not sin. So he didn't over-identify with, so to speak, right, with our condition. He's able to sympathize. He's been tempted. He's been tempted as we are in every way. Yet he didn't jump in a way in which truth no longer was there. He stayed guided by truth always, because it's his word, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's the path that we try to walk after, right? Is that the path that Christ set for us?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you guys got any more thoughts? You think we'll get any hate mail, anything like that?
Probably react. Yeah, probably reactions.
Too small to cancel.
But I got a high-vis shirt, so they'll
reactions from people who aren't going to read the articles or something, or actually take the time to, dive into his thoughts.
I think the one thing would be helpful is actually reading, before reading this, Screw Tape letters, or at least a few of them, to try to understand the prose.
Okay.
This helps.
Yeah.
I think that's not bad. Is that Man Rampant episode, like, free for people to watch?
It used to be. I don't know
if it is, that might be worth watching.
Canon Plus is a quality resource that we should get them to sponsor.
I mean, that'd be fun. I'll take pretty much anybody who's going to sponsor us, probably.
It's true. I wouldn't say anybody.
No,
David.
that's true.
Come on, bro. We have some standards.
We do.
Not high.
Anyway, I don't know of any other recommendations I have.
I would recommend the Canon Plus app.
There you go. I would recommend. I would recommend a book that I'm reading right now that I'm only about 20% into. but I think it's really good so far. It's called Politics After Christendom, and it's really good. Just on the subject of political theology for Christians in the wake of like the West sort of breaking down. And it's just a study by David Van Drunen about basically how we should conceive of the church, the state, what the state ought to do, and everything like that. I'm only 20% in. It could be horrible. The last 80% could be just absolute trash.
The first 20% is good.
Yeah, so far I think it's really good. So I'll recommend that.
I have a recommendation because this is something that's been on my heart and mind lately. Look for things, especially from Christians around church, local church, and friends, family, and even other resources, and build into that. Build the kingdom of heaven. That's what we're doing. Canon Plus or other podcasts, not necessarily ours or whatever, that have some kind of content. If they're blessing you in some way, radio stations, like I know Radio U has blessed all of us here. Look into it, pray for them, pray for people building the kingdom, and actually try to help. And you yourself have the opportunity to do something. Step up.
Maybe plant a church,
Maybe plant a church.
Pastor Dave.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
There you go. Yeah. Anyway, good episode, guys.
Andrew, you got anything?
Yeah, I mean, I was like, I don't have anything recommendation wise. I mean,
do you feel like we did all right?
I feel like we did all right.
We talked about empathy. I'm
looking forward to a little getaway with my wife, so that is a recommendation, I guess, to push pause and get away with your wife from time to time when you can. That's gonna be good here.
That's enough for this episode. More than enough. And next up, 89. And we'll see you guys then.